felt like time was going by normally all the way up until 2019/2020. And then 2020 is when COVID started. And 2020 to 2023, it's actually 4 years if you count it. You have 2020, 21, 22, 23. It's 4 years, but those 4 years really felt like 2 years. But then afterwards, 2024, 2025, it feels kind of like time resumed. And like 2024 was kind of like the first real year, or at least time started going like close to normally again. And then 2025 was like the second kind of like real year after this like 2020 to 2023 pause or event or whatever you want to call it. And so I've been thinking about this, and I always hear and read people say, "Oh, it's just perception. It's just because in COVID everyone was indoors, and so you perceive time differently, and that's why it feels like it just went by really fast, that like 2020 to 2023 era." But the thing is, I've always been like an indoor person. Like I kind of stay in a lot, so to me, like the years before COVID and the years during COVID, I lived like the exact same way. Like nothing really changed. So how could I have perceived time going by faster if to me like going out or staying indoors kind of it was like the same thing basically. My life didn't really change much. Yet I still felt like time went by really fast in those COVID years. Abnormally fast. And so I thought, hold on a second. Well, maybe older people, people say also like, okay, as you age, time goes by faster. Like you just see the years passing by faster. So now I was like, well, what about like older people? So then I asked my parents, like, how fast did they perceive that COVID era compared to regular years? And they said, yeah, like it kind of did go by like faster than other years, like faster than normal, like those specific years, faster than they're supposed to. But they gave their reasons. They didn't, go into my conspiracy theories or whatever because I didn't even present the theories yet at that time when I asked. But they gave their reasons. They're like, oh, we weren't doing much, like we weren't doing this and that and going on this vacation, this event. They gave their reasons why they thought time passed by abnormally faster during those years. But the point is, and from my end, is that they also perceive time to go by faster than normal. Even though to them, according to this, like as you age, perception, time goes by faster theory, those years should have gone equally as fast as the others, right? So that was another data point for me. And so all these things have rang a few bells and landed me on my two main theories or suspicions as to why it is that time went by faster, because honestly, I can't really believe that it's just perception for the two reasons I just listed, like me, staying indoors and my life not changing much. So how could perception change? And then also older people saying that like their perception also changed specifically during that time frame. Like I just don't buy it, I just don't. It's really hard for me to believe that like everyone just perceived time going by faster. That is like really, really hard for me to believe. At first I did believe it, like for a couple of years, but now I'm like, yeah, I don't really see that. What makes more sense to me is one of the two following things. The first is that time is going by physically faster. And by physically faster, I mean like we're measuring time wrong. Or our idea of how to measure time is incorrect or perhaps incomplete. Or alternatively, the second possible reason, second possible theory that I have is that perception affects aging. In other words, perception is like the time you perceive is actually the real time that passes by for you. And I think I'm most excited about this one, so I'll start with this theory, which is that let's say you are a sports player, okay, or maybe you play esports, and I've done both, so I can tell you feel the same flow state, okay, at the highest level. When you play at the highest level, in very intense situations, there come these moments where you're either in the sport or in the game, and it's so tense, it's so high level, you're at such a high level that in critical moments for you, time will slow down. So, when you remember Kawhi Leonard going for the three versus the Philadelphia 76ers, I think it was game 6, the buzzer beater. I guarantee you Kawhi perceived that as like, and everyone in there probably perceived it as a really long period of time. But in those tense situations, okay, you might perceive 1 second as being 3 seconds. So for you, you saw, you analyzed, you kind of like felt, I don't know if thinking. I don't know if you really thought that fast, but certainly you viewed and you analyzed, and time kind of like you saw time kind of like in slow motion, okay? In that small critical moment during your game, in your sport, or in your like video game, as long as the moment was very intense and very high level, there's a chance you could have entered flow state and perceived 1 second as lasting like 3 seconds or so, or maybe more, I don't know, but I would say like 3 seconds. And so the question there is, if I'm perceiving 1 second as 3 seconds, then does that mean I'm 1 second older or 3 seconds older? Because in terms of like clock, the time that everyone agrees upon, only 1 second passed. But in terms of my lived experience, I actually lived 3 seconds instead of one. Or at least that's what I think, right? Like I experienced that 1 second as 3 seconds. Like I experienced those entire 3 seconds. For me, that was 3 seconds. I lived it, I analyzed it, I like, looked around in slow motion. I like thought about it for a little bit or felt it or however you want to say, instinctually felt it, instinctually thought about the situation. Whatever it was, I entered flow state and it felt like I lived 3 seconds. So if someone asks me if I'm 1 second older or 3 seconds older, why would I say I'm 1 second older when I actually lived and experienced 3 seconds instead? To me, it makes a lot more sense to say that my perception, my perceived time, was the actual time that I got older by, or the actual time I lived. And so the point here is that I think perception might directly affect time, and it might directly affect aging as well. And so if you think about it, COVID is really, or was really, the inverse of this. Instead of you perceiving 1 second as 3 seconds, it's kind of like the inverse. You perceived 3 seconds as 1 second. So time went by faster and you perceived it faster. So you felt time going by faster, meaning you perceived time going by faster or being shorter, right? We lived 4 years, but we perceived it as 2. But like I explained in like the sports flow state scenario, if you lived the amount of time that you perceived, then doesn't it make a lot more sense that that's the real time that passed, because that's the real time that you actually lived and experienced? And so if we measure this time, let's call it true time or something, maybe the true time that you experienced during COVID was actually 2 years. Therefore, you lived 2 years instead of 4, because that was your lived experience. And I think you also aged 2 years instead of 4 for kind of the same reason, although maybe that makes it like a little bit harder to believe, because it's like, well, aging is something physical, right? But I think aging is really something about kind of like your body clock. It's not really about like, because I think the hard part is like trying to understand like the time that we agree upon and this kind of like perception time or true time. So the way it just makes sense to me is that we have kind of like, our body has like a clock, and when that clock passes by, that's how we age. And if we're living time in terms of perception at different rates, like, in that flow state scenario where I'm living 1 second as 3 seconds, right? I'm like looking around and analyzing and seeing everything in slow motion during 3 seconds. So my body doesn't know the difference. And so I feel like I would have aged 3 seconds there instead of 1 second in that like sports scenario where time is going by slower because I'm in flow state. And so in the inverse here, in the COVID scenario, I think it's kind of the same thing, but it's the inverse. I think we aged slower during COVID because we perceived time going by faster. So we perceived or lived 4 years as being 2 years. Our bodies couldn't tell the difference, and so our body clocks experienced 2 years instead of 4. And I was thinking about this recently again, and it's not so different from Einstein's theory of special relativity, right? Like I remember being taught this thing in high school, and it was about how when you travel either at or faster than the speed of light, the actual time for you is different than the time of someone like standing still on Earth. Like if you imagine yourself going by faster than the speed of light in a spaceship outwards away from Earth, and then like a single person staying stationary on Earth, you would both experience different times. And I feel like this whole perception idea is not so different from that. And this whole theory didn't start from that for me. It didn't like I didn't look at Einstein's theory first or think about that first and then, think like I thought about it separately and then I kind of like it reminded me of his special theory of relativity. And so that kind of gives me reassurance because I think those things are not too far away or far apart. But kind of like the whole overarching point here is that I think we're measuring time incorrectly. And the reason here in this theory number one would be that perception affects time, or let's say true time, and based on how we perceive time, and our perception of time is an actual factor into how much true time has actually passed and how much we have aged. And because perception is a factor of this true time, then we're actually measuring time incorrectly. Or at the very least, there's two times that we need to keep track of: the time that we all agree upon, and the true time that each person lives or experiences. And theory number two is that time is going by physically faster. In other words, think of time as being kind of like a wavelength on like an audio track on your video editing software, and someone can like make the audio go by faster or slower, kind of like, just in a YouTube video player, you're watching this right now, you can like 2x it or 1.5x. You're probably listening to 1.5x, honestly, because I think I speak kind of slow. But yeah, you just imagine you're able to like stretch or shrink time and make it go by slower or faster. And the whole idea is that for some unknown reason, which I guess it's maybe not so interesting anymore, but for some unknown reason, time went by physically faster recently. But the other key thing is actually that it kind of is connected to the previous thing, to be honest, because I mean it's a separate thing, but it has this aspect of us having our own individual kind of like body clock or perceived time. And then we have the other time, which is like the time we all agree upon. So the time we all agree upon, or the days or whatever, that thing was shrunk, so it went by a lot faster. But our actual like body clock or perceived time kind of like stayed the same. In other words, somebody in those COVID years, for example, if you have 2020 to 2023, they managed to shrink down that time to be just 2 years instead of 4, but they fit all like, 4 times 12 months in there. They fit in 4 Christmases, 4 New Year's, 4 everything in there. So they shrunk down the time, but the actual true time that it took was 2 years. And therefore we only aged 2 years, but if you count the calendar days and the time that we all agree upon, it looks like it was 4 years. And the time, it adds up to 4 years. And like I said, I think part of the key or a key piece of this is that there's kind of like 2 different times. Kind of like the true time, whatever that is. And then there's like the calendar and clock time that we all agree upon. And there's kind of like a disconnect between the two. You can have them both overlap and be exactly the same, or you can shrink the calendar days time and the time we all agree upon, but the other time will remain the same. This sort of like true time. So true time will remain the same, but the calendar time, the time agreed upon, could be shrunk or stretched. And so if you shrink the calendar time, but the true time remains the same, you think about, like I said, this whole period of 2020 to 2023, it's supposed to be 4 years, but it felt like 2, because true time that passed there was 2 years, but calendar time was 4 years. So they shrunk and fit 4 calendar years into those 2 true time years. And there isn't really like an explanation or like a thought experiment or anything behind this theory number 2. It was actually the first possible reason or solution that I could come up with to explain, this like feeling of time going by faster. But then I arrived at the previous theory number 1, and I think that one might be better, but I don't know which one is the real answer. Maybe none of them. Maybe I'm just retard maxing. But every now and then I think about it, and I think like, yeah, I don't buy that whole like it was just perception, bro. Like I don't buy that whole thing, because like I said, for me, time before, during, and after COVID was pretty much the same, like the way I lived it. So I don't really see how perception could have affected my, like, because my way of living was pretty much the same. So how could my perception have changed specifically during those years? Because afterwards, now in 2024 and 2025, I feel like time kind of like resumed. So, because of those reasons, is why I went about like trying to find some possible explanation to this, and I found this theory number one and theory number two. First came theory number two, actually, like I said, and then theory number one. But yeah, and yeah, I feel like these two theories make a lot more sense to me than the whole like it was just perception, bro. They make a lot more sense to me than that. But I'm just a human, so my mind changes all the time. Right now, as I'm recording this, and for the past few months, I've believed this that some other theory has to explain it, like these two theories that I explained. But before that, I totally believed that it was just perception, bro. But these past couple months or whatever, or 6 months, I don't know how long, I lean towards theory number two, and now I'm leaning towards theory number one, which is that perception affects aging, and that perceived time is kind of like the true time. That like there's two time, like both perceptions kind of say that there's two times that we need to measure, right? The calendar time that we all agree upon, and then like kind of like the true time. It's just that theory number one, I think, says that like, okay, perception directly affects true time, and then I'm not sure what I'm saying in theory number two, but yeah, the whole point is just that there's this other time that's called true time, and that's why it feels like we're measuring time incorrectly, or our idea of measuring time is incomplete. And yeah, right now I'm leaning more towards that theory number one, that perception affects aging and perception is a factor in true time. And these two theories could also explain why people nowadays age a lot slower than back in the day. Like if you look at the 80s or the 70s and you look at a 30-year-old, they look a lot older than people who are 30 in 2026. And so why is that? And the main reason people always give is like the food supply. It's like, oh, it's really just the food supply and advancements in technology. And I actually can believe that. Like that actually does make a lot of sense to me. But I don't think it's as big of a factor as people say it is. I think there must be other things external to that. And I think this is where this idea of time could perfectly fit in to explain that. Because both of the theories that I explained are based on the same core idea, which is that there's two different times that we have to measure. Therefore, if we're only measuring the time that we all agree upon, aka the calendar time, then we're missing this whole other component of true time that we still haven't measured. And so if we only measure calendar time, our time measurement will be incomplete or incorrect. And basically the whole idea is that in the 80s or the 70s, true time was much closer, like a one-to-one fit to calendar time. So 30 years of calendar time was the same thing back then as 30 years of true time. But nowadays, in 2026, there's kind of a gap where calendar years is more time than the amount of true time that passed by during those 30 years. So maybe in 30 years, maybe it was 30 years of calendar time in 2026, but maybe the time that passed was only 28 or 27 years of true time. And whether you use theory number two, which suggests that during certain time periods, there's this external unknown thing that has shrunk the amount of true time, or whether it's theory number one, which suggests that our perception of like how we perceive time is our actual lived experience. Therefore, there's a component of time, aka true time, which is directly dictated by our perception of time. Therefore, if we perceive time faster, then we age slower, essentially, because there's less true time inside of that time. And if we experience time slower, then we age faster, because if we experience time slower, then there's more true time that we fit inside of that calendar time. And so the example here with a 30-year-old in the 80s versus a 30-year-old in 2026, the 30-year-old in the 80s could have perceived 30 years exactly of true time and calendar time, whereas the 30-year-old in 2026, he might have lived 30 calendar years, but he might have only perceived 28 years, which were his actual lived experience. Therefore, his true time was actually closer to 28 or 27, or maybe less, I don't know. But regardless of which of these two theories you consider, Since they're both based on the idea of there being two separate times, true time and calendar time, then like I said, this could perfectly explain a big reason why people age a lot slower nowadays, why they look younger. You know, a 30-year-old looks a lot younger nowadays than a 30-year-old in the 80s. And like I said, you know, like I think that food and technological advancements they do play a factor, but I just don't think they're as big of a factor as people make them out to be. And I think this time thing, I mean, I don't know if it, you know, it perfectly fits, but I don't know, you know, maybe it's like a 50-50 split. Maybe the food is like 50% and the time thing is like the other 50%. I don't know. And so I do think this could play a factor and does play a factor in it some way, somehow. Anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. This has been Omero2582. Thank you guys for watching. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.